they've now got a black actor playing Severus Snape, it's going to be very interesting when you see some of the flashbacks to Harry's dad bullying him for his appearance in school. That's going to have a whole different context now. And I think Hermione is played by a mixed race actress. She's called a mudblood in the book series because she comes from non-magical parents. But again, that's going to have a whole different meaning when you see this in a modern context.
Do we need another Harry Potter? Do you think it's time for Harry Potter again?
I mean, as far as I understand it, the movies were pretty well received, and I think, for the most part, they did justice to the books. Anything at this point is just going to be a money-making exercise. That's all it comes down to. And sure, it's a chance to, refresh their lineup with a whole new bunch of actors that they can exploit for a TV show. In terms of how much money they make from it, it's a TV series, it's not movies, so you're not going to have box office revenue necessarily from it. But it is going to be an expensive one to make. So I don't really know what they're hoping to achieve with this, apart from just renewing the rights to the brand and keeping it going as long as they can. That seems to be it. Yeah, you're just telling the same story again.
So this is HBO. Again, there's been some controversies already, and I don't know if they've even started properly production on the casting in particular. So what do you make of their casting decisions so far?
So, as I understand it, they've now got a black actor playing Severus Snape, it's going to be very interesting when you see some of the flashbacks to Harry's dad bullying him for his appearance in school. That's going to have a whole different context now. And as far as I understand as well, they've cast the three mains, so Harry, Ron, and Hermione. And I think Hermione is played by a mixed race actress, which again, she's called a mudblood in the book series because she comes from non-magical parents. But again, that's going to have a whole different meaning when you see this in a modern context. Whether they'll lean into that and they're doing this intentionally or whether it's just a byproduct, I'm not sure. But yeah, it doesn't seem to have a good intent behind it. And I do feel bad for the actors. They are probably going to cop a lot of flack for this one that they absolutely don't deserve.
Anyone playing Snape after Alan Rickman's performance, I think is going to face criticism, to be fair.
Yes, that is some big shoes to fill.
Yeah. J.K. Rowling, obviously, she is, again, someone who's super controversial at the moment among young people. If you see people on TikTok talking about Harry Potter or on Twitter, they always they say, I love Harry Potter, but I hate J.K. Rowling. Do you think that she kind of might make the show less woke? Because she obviously stood up for herself and put herself in jeopardy in a way by being so outspoken on the trans issue.
I mean, she definitely has been outspoken about that. I think in all other respects, though, people need to stop pretending that J.K. Rowling is somehow based. Like, she is not. She is a hardcore lefty progressive in every other way. So I can't imagine she's going to stand up for any other aspect of the casting or anything like that. She's probably 100% behind it.
Some of her character names are quite funny, and again, she's been criticised for pseudo-racism, I suppose. Zhou Chang, I think that was like the Chinese character, is the best example of that. And there are others which people have talked about. What did you make of well, first of all, you can comment on that, but what did you make of the original films? Do you think they were good?
The original films, yeah, I quite like them. I mean, I've only just gotten into the books myself because I put it off for many, many years. I was never that interested, but I thought I'd give them a try. So I'm like halfway through the series now. And as far as I can tell, the movies follow the plots pretty closely. When they do omit things or condense stuff, I can see why they did it for the sake of like runtime and so on. So that all makes sense. And I think as far as the characters' names go, she got a lot of them apparently from a local graveyard called Greyfriars Kirk, just near where she was living at the time in Edinburgh. And, it's an old graveyard from like 300-400 years ago where people had crazy old-fashioned names, and that's where she picked a lot of them from, just the gravestones. But as for like more exotic ones, maybe when she was writing these books, the internet wasn't really so much of a thing, and so she didn't have access to, more information that would have helped her. Not sure, but yeah. I'm sure she would redo it if she had the chance.
The Last of Us, Season 2, finished last week. What did you make of the finale?
I mean, it's exactly what I expected based on the games. You know, it pretty much recycles everything from it beat for beat. So if you've played the games, you've seen the TV show already. For anyone who hadn't, wow, it must have been a downbeat ending. Ellie officially becomes one of the most unlikable protagonists in TV history. She murders a pregnant woman and gets her friends killed and doesn't seem to have even much remorse for it. So, wow, what a downer.
The season has concluded now. What's your sort of overall thoughts of season 2? And do you think that HBO will be listening to some of the criticisms when they're producing the next season?
I don't think they will because they had 5 years worth of criticisms for the games and they didn't listen to a single piece of that. They just went ahead and, as I say, recycled pretty much the entire story beat for beat. So, no, I don't think they're going to learn too much from it. I think they're too committed to it now. And yeah, my overall thoughts for the season, wow, what a disaster. I don't think I've seen any show fall from grace quite as badly as The Last of Us. I mean, people broadly supported season 1. I thought it was a pretty good season of TV, and the only problem was we knew where it was all leading. We hoped perhaps they might deviate from the source material and do something different, but as it turns out, they didn't, and they paid the price for it.
And that's partly down to the casting decisions. There's been a lot of criticism of some of the acting in the show, but also choosing people who perhaps aren't quite the same look as the original Ellie, not kind of attractive people they're casting. Again, this is a kind of woke criticism of The Last of Us and other TV shows at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it even has to come down to attractiveness so much as, okay, perhaps the actress isn't going to look too much like Ellie, even though people have argued that the actress who's playing Abby in the show actually looks a lot more like Ellie than the one who's playing Ellie, which is kind of ironic. But if she can inhabit that character and at least bring her personality into it, then that's something at least. But I think that's the other big criticism that people have for Bella Ramsey is that her performance just doesn't have the dramatic range that it needs to convey Ellie's personality. And, you know, you can see it if you watch some of the side-by-side comparisons of the game cutscenes versus the TV show. The difference in acting and the emotions that are conveyed, it's like night and day. It is really quite scary that a video game can be more real than actual real human actors in this case.
Another big franchise that concluded this week is Mission Impossible. I think it's concluded, maybe you can correct me. But without giving too many spoilers away, I know some people probably haven't seen the film. What did you make of this? I think it's the finale of Mission Impossible series, Mission Impossible 8.
It's a bit of a mess. The way I described it is the plot consists of about 80% MacGuffins and then 20% of characters explaining the plot to the audience multiple times because there's far too many things going on, especially towards the finale. There's so many different elements that have to come together in order to resolve this. They way overcomplicated it. And the result is just a plot that is really difficult to follow by the end. And it didn't need to be this way. It really gives the impression as well of a movie that was quite hastily rewritten, especially the third act. There's certain plot elements that are brought up, and I'm trying not to spoil this for people who haven't seen it. But there are things that are established early on that are just changed midway through the movie. And it really feels like they just rewrote that because they lost confidence in it. I think the fact that Dead Reckoning Part 1, which is now just Dead Reckoning because they've renamed the movies, the fact that didn't do well, I think put them into a bit of a panic, and they did have to rewrite it somewhat. And it is a shame because the action sequences are really good. Obviously, Tom Cruise brings his best to every movie that he's in, and still a tremendously entertaining star in his own right. And at 60-odd years old, he's better at this action stuff than a lot of guys half his age. So it is impressive, but unfortunately, the movie is just let down by a bad script. As for whether or not this will be the final one, I wouldn't rule anything out, because it doesn't have the kind of conclusive ending that you might think for the final entry in the Mission Impossible series, and so I wouldn't be entirely surprised if a few years down the line they decide to do another one. We'll see.
So obviously Mission Impossible has been a huge franchise for decades now. I recently watched actually for the first time, the first Mission Impossible. I have to say, I don't think that movie stands the test of time. it was okay, but it comes across now as quite kind of outdated. Some of the technology and stuff, it's just quite cringe. What do you make of the franchise overall? And you recently called Tom Cruise the last true movie star. Can you expand on that?
Sure. Well, as to the Tom Cruise point, yeah, I think a lot of people see him as that now. One, because he doesn't get too involved in social media. He doesn't feel the need to share every thought that pops into his head like so many other stars do, in a way that makes them incredibly mundane and boring. And two, he is grateful for what he does. You know, you've probably seen it yourself if you go to one of his movies. I think Top Gun Maverick did this as well. Before the movie starts, there'll be a little video of Tom Cruise himself just thanking the audience, thanking all the people who worked on the film, thanking people for supporting cinema and coming along to see it. It's a simple gesture, but it means a lot to people. It's nice to know that the stars who are making these films do appreciate the people who ultimately pay their wages. And so that is neat. I like that. I'd like to see more of that. And yeah, as for the franchise as a whole, yeah, it's the longevity of this thing has been incredible. You know, I was just starting high school when the first Mission Impossible movie came out. Now I'm in my 40s. You know, it's become a generational franchise. But the staying power of it is impressive. You know, certainly you go back to those early movies. Yes, the technology has changed quite a bit since then. And yeah, the things that were cutting edge in 1996, not so much today, obviously. You'd expect that. But they experimented, at least in the early stages. You know, you had John Woo directing the second film. You had J.J. Abrams directing the third one. Then eventually you get Christopher McQuarrie and they locked down the formula then. Everything just settled into a groove. The franchise found its rhythm and they just started churning out, you know, hit after hit and found a lot of success with it. Obviously it's tailed off a little bit towards the end, but yeah, I think it's a lot of fun to be had from Mission Impossible movies. You kind of know what you're going to get with them, and it's a lot of entertainment.
How do you think that Ethan Hunt, this is the main character of the franchise, how does he compare to other superhero type people like Bond and John Wick and Jason Bourne?
What's interesting about him is that, I don't know, he never became bigger than the movies he was in. When you mentioned things like Bond, the Bond character became more iconic than any particular film that he was part of. He was a mainstay of culture. Not so much with Ethan Hunt, and I think that's kind of intentional. He's, at least in the early movies, they were trying to give him a more everyman quality. Yes, he's an action star and so on, but he's not necessarily the centerpiece of the movies. It's the action, it's the plot, it's the team building that they often have, particularly in the later entries. But I don't know. I think maybe Tom Cruise himself might overshadow the character that he's playing with this one. And, you know, people just see, it's a Tom Cruise movie, right? You know, rather than it being an Ethan Hunt movie.
Okay, so I mentioned earlier that Hollywood seems to keep churning out the same stuff, remakes, nothing's original anymore. Is there anything that's coming out this year, next year, in the next few years that you're excited about that's original content that that you've seen announced?
Oh, well, this is another sequel, but 28 years later, I'm hopeful that that's going to be good because you know the series has been pretty good so far. They've got the original director back and so on, so hopefully that'll be a good movie. That's just out in a few weeks, and yeah, I think I mentioned this previously, but Mobland is an original that's out at the moment. That's a very good show. It's Guy Ritchie, and yeah, it's well written, well acted, got a great cast. It's an original piece as far as I know, so that's really good. But as for like mainline Hollywood movies that are coming up, yeah, it's the whole slate of summer movies is just sequels and remakes. Sadly, there's nothing big on the horizon that's new and original.
Okay, finally, is there anything that you would recommend? We've been criticizing a lot of stuff in this interview. What would you recommend that viewers watch now? I mean, what have you seen recently that you thought, wow, that was fantastic?
Clarkson's Farm. I that is just like the ultimate easy viewing. It's super entertaining, super heartwarming and wholesome, and it's just a lot of fun. And it's weird because it's one of the most popular TV shows on Amazon Prime. It probably cost next to nothing to make. It's just a middle-aged man dicking around on a farm, and yet there it is. It's like one of the most compelling things you can watch right now. So yeah, that'd be my recommendation.
It's quite wholesome, isn't it? Why do you think it connects so well? I mean, it is brilliant. Even in America, I think it's pretty popular. Why do you think it's done so well?
I think it's there's an honesty to it, and it actually sheds light on a lot of issues, like the problems that farmers have, like the all the roadblocks that get put in their way by like local government and stuff. I think, man, everyone can relate to that. There's always some asshole counselor who stops you from doing anything. And yeah, it seems to be a guy who's genuinely, trying. He fails a lot of the time because he's kind of clueless, but I think for British people especially, there's something really endearing about that. We're quite used to like messing up and failing, but we keep trying, and yeah, there's just something very human and universal about it.
But what about the lack of diversity? I haven't seen any ethnic minorities in it.
I know, it's
So
shocking.
how can it be a good program without that? I don't understand.
As people have said before, just because something has a lack of diversity does not mean it suffers from a lack of diversity. I think that's something to always keep in mind.